Mm, mm, mm. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Francesca Warren. This is the education news that you need to know. Now, guys, this is our first live taping, and I'm so excited about this. If you've been following us since the beginning of the year, we decided that it was time for us to talk education news. Now, for those who are not educators, sometimes you're like, why do you need education news? But I think it was important, especially during these times where we talk about all of the things that we see that are happening and kind of put some common sense back into how we teach, how we talk about education and what is actually happening. I'm really excited to have Dr. Leah Ailey. Did I say your last name right? Ailey
Leah,
or
yes.
Allie? Okay. And she is one of our top 50 educators. She's amazing. She's done so many things. Dr. Allie, hold on. Am I saying your last name correct?
Yes, you are. You've got it, Francesca.
Dr. Allie, can you introduce yourself and tell us just what you do, all of the great things that we need to know about you?
I would love to. And Francesca, no pressure that this is the first. I had no idea. And, I was actually sharing with Francesca before we went live that I start my day every day with Francesca. I feel like when I can get my head right and get my heart right, the day's bound to be good. So I'm excited to be here. I'm Lee Alley. I'm the coordinator of teacher education at the University of Maine at Augusta. And we are a public university. Proudly public is sort of my motto as a teacher. I've been in education for 25 years, if you don't count my undergraduate time and practica and those sorts of things. I'm an assistant professor of education. I'm also the founder of Accelerated, and that's a social emotional learning group that really focuses on how do we sort of restore what feels like a more human cadence to doing life and school together. I'm top 50 educator, as you mentioned, a proud member of something called the Worthy Educator, where I blog regularly and those sorts of things. And I'm excited, Francesca, to be here because being part of this conversation is so important. And, it's easy to say never more important than now. And I think every sort of generation has felt that way. But this is a supremely important time to be talking about education because education is the way we are all better. If you want to transform a community, do it with education. So thanks for having me.
I love that. And we're so happy to have you. And before we start, guys, because this is going to be some serious topics, I want to kind of get into something that has really impacted all K-12 education, specifically probably more middle and high school, but it's this Canvas hacking, right? So on the educatorsroom.com, we've had lots of opinions about this. And guys, before I go any further, introduce yourself in the chat, tell us where you're from, all those things. But a professor sends an email out after the Canvas hacking, and I'm going to read the email. He says, students, he or she, because we don't know, students, I understand that Canvas has been down for much of this evening. However, the final exam study guide has been posted for a week and a half. You've had ample time to download it. Your TA now has a copy, so if you need it, please email them if you want a copy. In response to numerous student queries, number one, the final exam will take place tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. in Holden Hall as scheduled. I will not reschedule it. Two, I will not be giving any makeup final exams. That's it. What, you're a college professor, like, talk us through what would you do if you have this big final, Canvas is down. Would you give them more time to turn in their study guide? Tell us. I have to know this.
Oh, Francesca, I love that you just started with such a softball question for me. I like to approach everything with a spirit of inquiry, and I like to also have a charitable heart about people and their choices. It's not what I would have done, but I think the reality for my students might be a little bit different than some institutions that serve perhaps a more traditional learner, and certainly every institution is slightly different, even if there are some commonalities. But I'm a professor of teacher education, and we have so many non-traditional learners. And I'm thinking, imagine the Canvas blackout. If that happened to me, I think I would lose my mind. If my bright space went down, I would be in panic mode. But I remember what it was like to be a full-time graduate student and be a full-time teacher with a full-time family and children, and trying to prioritize the many competing responsibilities that I had. I can't imagine what it would be like if I were to try to log in, see that there's this blackout situation. If I had kind of charted the week ahead of me for my finals and had planned a certain window of time to make myself really ready for a course, and then was surprised by something like that, I could see from my learners, or for me as a learner, that I would maybe be really stirred up by the tumults of that. I might not be able to perform. I might, feel frazzled. It might interrupt some other things that I was trying to really juggle as those competing priorities too. I think as a professor, I would have said, I understand that, this might have inconvenienced a number of you. I'm willing to be flexible in these ways. There is that sort of asterisk about, we always say it's in the syllabus. If it's in the syllabus, it's almost sort of like Bible, but things happen out of the ordinary, and we have to honor people's lived experience. As much as we make plans for things, real life happens, and we have to allow for that real life. So I don't know the situation with the professor. I'm not trying to judge. It's not what I would have done in the face of that. And I have been reading a little bit about that, and it sounds like a lot of institutions are really affected by that. So hopefully we're granting each other some grace.
Yeah, and I love what you said about that, because I immediately thought about that, and I thought about all the schools that we have that are using online technology, whether good, bad, or indifferent. And I just thought to myself, what a nightmare for professors, teachers, just to have to navigate this and the worry that's going to come with it. So totally agree with you. Guys, if you're new here, please drop a comment in the chat. We're going to go to South Carolina. Now, I've been talking about this for the last 2 weeks. South Carolina State, which is a historically Black university, they in Orangeburg, South Carolina, they recently had some controversy around their commencement. Now, if you don't know this young woman right here, this is Pamela Evitt, and she is the Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina, and she's also running for the governor of South Carolina. So there was a lot of controversy. She was announced as the commencement speaker. Students fought back. I would play her response when she responded to the students, but basically she said, she's not going to stand for DEI, et cetera, et cetera. And the students really hammered their president, their board of trustees. Why did you pick her? She does not show our values here. Have you been reading up on this story? Because it's actually quite insane. But what do you think about this?
Well, I have so many thoughts about it, Francesca, and I have been following this story because, I'm a whole child educator, and I think about lived identity so often. And I'm thinking about the way that we honor people's lived experiences, identity, dignity, belonging, voice, all of the things. And so for those reasons, even at the face, I found it to be a really interesting choice. And then in the handling of it, in the sort of aftermath and the fallout, I just feel like there have to be transparent processes by which we come to these decisions, especially when, I'm thinking, I just had commencement at my university yesterday, and listening to the speakers that were chosen to come, and our student speaker who was there. And, if nothing else, the experience of what you're listening to in that space has to honor your own lived experience. And so how someone got, put into a position to be a speaker in that way should be very transparent. The idea of, a shared governance as part of the process, how do you voice respectful dissent? How are we encouraging learners to speak up if we feel like they do that, and then they're sort of swatted with that rolled up newspaper for even speaking out about their unhappiness with decisions? How do we listen to each other? How do we hold community with each other? All of these things. And I just think that there are lessons here. There are real impacts to real people when we make these choices. And I think you said it, Francesca, when you talked about values. We want a clear alignment between the values of institutions and students' experiences. And, I'm thinking about the way that we celebrate learners coming to the end of one journey and beginning another. We should be honoring identity, experience, agency, all of those things in those moments. And I'm a big believer too that in order to change what we're experiencing right now in America and across the world, we have to be willing to have dialogue with each other. And I don't like the way that dialogue was really shut down in the face of this emerging story.
One of the things that I noticed was there was a student there who, I guess one night they were studying because it was finals, and the student said, "We're not rejecting her because she's conservative." We're rejecting her because of her dialogue around some issues that we see. We don't mind that she's not the same political affiliation as us. And that was something that I was like, you know what? That's a good point to make. And while I appreciate, the lieutenant governor, absolutely. But then I also think she fueled the fire because when she responded to the students, I would think because these students are paying to go there. It is your only public HBCU.
Mm.
And one of the things that she says is she doesn't tell the kids, I understand that you're upset. This is what I'm going to talk about. She doesn't build bridges. She essentially says, I'm not going to let DEI tell me what to do. And I'm like, read the room, lady. Like, what is happening? So do you think that this was planned? Because the offset of this is that she was after she was announced, the students protested, but then they disinvited her and they got two more. Did you see where now there are legislators in South Carolina who are saying that they need to defund South Carolina State
Mm.
University? And I was like, well, what? You can't do that.
No. Well, and so many of these issues that we're going to touch on tonight, Francesca, really do touch on that issue of education as a public good. I would hope it isn't planned. I would hope that the ideas that we need to invite dialogue, as both you and I have talked about, but just this idea of, I'm going to reject the idea of DEIB and all of these sorts of things. I don't understand how we got to the place where equity is treated as such a controversial topic. It's like, how can you not understand that not everyone starts from the same place in life with the same resources? I'm thinking of my own son who's turning 22 and who is autistic. If you couldn't understand that we could hold a destination in mind for all people and understand people have to take different routes to get there, then you just don't understand lived experience generally. I would hope that it's not planned, Francesca, but it feels like so many things are happening that are just those flashpoint issues, and everything is so polarizing. I would hope the goal had been dialogue. This is not how we achieve it.
It's important to note when we start speaking DEI, the data shows us that women are the number one recipients of DEI. And so for her to be the lieutenant governor, I'm like, do you really believe this? And like you said, it's belonging. Like you have a student with autism, you have a student with just a different experience. You want them to feel welcome. So I was very disappointed in her, and I was even more disappointed that she used this as a point to spew rhetoric that she knew was not going to be accepted by that student body. So I was very disappointed for her. They have new speakers. Their graduation was yesterday. I think it went well. It was great, but I was very disappointed because if we're not going, like when you're an elected official, my thing is you're supposed to be the example to our students. So when you decide you're not going to be the example, that to me is a red flag. So we're going to wait and see.
And just responsibility in the face of all that too. The way we need to be responsible to each other, for each other. You're exactly right. It's leadership.
Yeah. Now we're going to leave South Carolina and we're going to go to Texas. Did you read Plato when you were coming up?
I did. Yeah, sure did.
Okay. So this is actually probably even more insane than our story in South Carolina. But we have Texas A&M. There was a professor. His name was Martin Peterson. He was a philosophy professor. He was at Texas A&M. He was told that he needed to excise some of his teachings of Plato from his syllabus. And this enraged the professor so much in his philosophy class, he actually has tenured his resignation for Texas A&M, and he's going to a new college. Now, I got to know, what is controversial about Plato? I have some ideas about philosophy and why people do not want students to study it, but did you hear about this story?
I did. I think it's interesting. There's so much connective tissue for the topics we're going to cover, I think, today in terms of whole child education and how we make, communities stronger and those sorts of things. I've heard about it. It's so alarming to me, Francesca, because I don't understand You actually were even addressing this the other day when you were talking about, what happened with the silhouette of clothes controversy. And, I just think that we treat so many experiences as if it's just plug and play content, like all content's equal content. And it's not content. Plato is not content. It's how you grapple with the truths of the human experience. And never was, a time maybe that we needed that more than now. If you think about, I don't know, ethical reasoning, complex thinking, historical understanding would be really helpful right now, all of those sorts of things. And so we can't reduce that down to just content. We're not talking about moral philosophy here. We're not talking about politics even. We're talking about how do we just grapple with what it means to be human, and how do we become better at being human together. We are sharing this experience. We are responsible to each other in the experience. And so I don't know, if I were paring down my curriculum, I don't think I'd start with Plato.
I wouldn't start with Plato. And to tell a professor who is a philosophy professor, Plato is at the heart of his teachings, that he will have to take some of that out. It feels as if we don't want students to think.
I agree with you fully, Francesca. I fully agree with that. If you think about, just discernment, your ability to tell the difference between something that's high quality and something that isn't, something that is a lie couched in the truth. I keep coming back to just this idea of, human flourishing. Plato is essential to human flourishing. These are the things that we're, stripping students of the opportunity to experience when we're saying there's no room in the curriculum for this, then there's no room for justice, there's no room for any of it.
So one of my questions, and been thinking about this as I've been covering these stories, is that Texas is a big, large, diverse state. And I wonder if the goal is to make people scared to teach anything that doesn't align with the current administration, because never before, we've had Republican presidents, we've had Democratic presidents, but we've never had, I don't feel like we've ever had a time in our nation, well, we have, but last 20 years, where people are afraid to teach Plato. People are afraid, like you're going to lose your job. And for the professor to say, I will quit and I will resign and teach at another private school where this law does not take an impact. I wonder about, was this the goal of the legislation? Because this was over, a House bill and I'm going to find the House bill number, but it was a House bill that has spurred all of this censorship in Texas and around what teachers teach.
Yeah, I think that's a great question related to the question you asked about the last headline too, Francesca. I probably should have said at the top of the hour, just disclaimer, I'm representing my own position, not the position of my university, all those things, because you're so right. It's like people are so afraid and, you're so worried about the institution and all of that. But I just was thinking, while you were sharing so brilliantly, Francesca, that at one time, and I'm not saying there's a rightness or a wrongness to this, but at one time, in a way, the teacher was above reproach, and that the teacher had autonomy. The teacher created a curriculum. The teacher was trusted that if they were sharing this, then there was something really edifying in it. There was something purposeful about it. We would have asked a question before we would have challenged. We would have sought to understand. And I really worry, you asked this question about just, the ability to think for yourself and those sorts of things. If we're not cultivating intellectual courage in people, how are we going to cultivate any other type of courage? And, faculty are the front lines with this. And I mentioned earlier, just that concept of shared governance. And that's something we grapple with all the time at my university. But there is no question that the curriculum belongs to the faculty. And it's important that the curriculum belongs to the faculty, because making decisions in this way has to be with experts. And I also am uncomfortable with how we got to the place where we don't trust people who have studied their lifelong. I'm thinking about the fact that, just with my own story, and I can imagine with you too, Francesca, I was a full-time student from the age of 5 until the age of 35 to become doctorally. There were lots of degrees stacked up. And it was like, well, you just must have loved learning. Well, yes, on the one hand, but on the other hand, I would see a need that someone had to fill. And I knew there was no one to do it. So I better get versed in being able to be that person for my rural community. And nowhere along the line did anybody say, here's what we're questioning about your curriculum. They trusted me to build a curriculum and to have, that lead from the front mentality, that leaderful courage to ask questions, to drill down, all of it. And I actually saw a post about, AI today. And I'm not saying that can't be a tool either, but it's like, oh, how wonderful when all of the knowledge of the world will be at your fingertips. Well, the flip side of that coin is how scary will it be when you don't have the ability to question whether or not that's good information or nuanced information or any of it. You don't know where to go look. It's fed to you. I think you're asking all the right questions, Francesca. These are the things I'm grappling with too. I'm really concerned about them.
Yeah. And one of the things is that kids go to college to learn different perspectives.
Mm.
That is the goal of college. Like you learn how to deal with people who aren't like you. You learn how to, take ideas and say, oh, I like this or I don't, or I believe in this or I don't, and I don't. And I feel like we're moving towards a place in our country where parents don't want that to happen. And I worry for the next generation of students, the next generation of our workforce, where they have not been exposed to thinking and what does that mean for them.
You're so right, Francesca. And I'm thinking too, like, I talked about social emotional learning at the top of the hour, and it's like DEIB. It's like you have people who want to make this very political, which it's the most apolitical anything ever could be. The idea that we want good outcomes for all people. Not sure how there could be anything controversial about that, but there's this feeling, I think you're right. I mean, families want to be an important part of that conversation, as they should be. The family is the first and forever teacher, and we need to honor them and not leapfrog them or circumvent them. This has to be a conversation there too. But, the idea that SEL could be controversial, that equity could be controversial. It's like schools exist in service to communities and not vice versa. And if you think that schools are able to operate without, propagating the values of community, then you've never understood what school was for. And that's all of our collective responsibility. Family, school, community has to partner in having that conversation.
And I like that idea of partnering, and I like that idea of letting the reins go, because we've seen this in high school where parents are so enthralled with what kids are learning that they want to dictate what other kids read, right? So if we look at some of the book banning and we look at some of the reasoning behind it, you have high school parents who say, and it's totally fine for you to say, I don't want my child to read XYZ. Totally okay. I can deal with that. But there is a movement of, I don't want my child to read it and I don't want your child to read it. And that is the sticky part of it. And so you see that in high school, and then to get to college, where you see lawmakers making laws that tell professors they cannot teach their content is frightening, to say the least. What do you have any ideas? Because a lot of this connectiveness, and I encourage people to run for office, is that you have state legislators who are making decisions about education to prove a political point. They're not making it to make students' lives better, more efficient. They're looking at it to get a win on the political side. How can we stop this?
Well, I guess I have some thoughts about it. I think on the one hand, social media, as wonderful as the tool can be, and that's how we're connected. I mean, this is our first time meeting face to face, but I feel like I've known you forever because I've been watching you and learning from you and thinking along with you and all of it. But I feel like there's such a strange posturing that happens online, Francesca, that I don't recall ever experiencing in the past. There's such a sense of one-upmanship and gotcha and all of that. And I don't remember that was our fundamental spirit in interacting with each other in the past. And I think that you're right. The proving a political point, I don't sometimes think people realize how many pawns there are in part of that process. It's like you wonder, what is the agenda driving some of these things? Because if we're looking at good outcomes for all people, then this isn't the way that we get there. And having the further polarizing conversation and all of those sorts of things is definitely not how we arrive. I wish we could get back to the place, and I guess maybe I think about third spaces sometimes, Francesca, because I think about libraries and community centers and the places that we would gather in real time, face to face together. And we're losing those, in the face of this social media age where it's like, well, I could say I'm sending my condolence to someone who just lost their loved one rather than be at the funeral of the loved one. Do you know what I mean? We're allowing this to be almost like a proxy for a human experience because we're not in those shared spaces having these conversations anymore. It's just folks shouting from their side, and they're trying to shout louder, I think, in order to be heard. And I think that you talked about it when you were talking about the purpose of higher education. Perspective taking is so important. And now we're not interested in hearing perspective. We're only interested in furthering our own perspective. And that is not how we get to the goals of society. It just will never be.
We're both educators, so we have this inherent need to make sure that people understand, this is what it is, right? But I also think there's another side of this where people who are making these laws are politicians who have an axe to grind and who want to exclude. Their goal is not a shared governance. Their goal is not to make sure that everybody feels included. It is to push the viewpoint of whatever that political party is. In Texas, it has really been, I think Texas and Florida have been the try me states of what can we try and what can we expand to. So, you see Texas telling people, not to teach this. And then you have Florida that says freshman students can no longer take sociology as a year one class if it's not in their major. It's just so. I definitely think that we're up against people who are not educators, and that is scary.
Well, and you just said it, Francesca. So much of what you're sharing is exactly. I think maybe this is why I start my day with you. It's like I just feel an alignment every time I'm watching you in the morning. And when the story's new, I'm like, oh, Francesca talked about this. I got to go look into it. But, you said it, because when I talked about just education as a public good, if you think about what that means, in order for something to be a public good, it has to be non-excludable. And it has to be non-rivalrous. And what you're offering as examples, that's not then protecting a public good if we're setting up these conditions. And so how do we return to the place where we're treating education as a public good? And I think the eroding sense among our populace that it isn't a public good should alarm us. I think if you look at societies that are failed in the past, the minute you start banning books and burning them, you've taken a turn. I mean, this is real dystopian stuff. And, you also were talking to Francesca, and I was thinking about my own lived experience. I grew up in abject poverty in the poorest county of Maine, and Maine is often considered America's most rural state. I also am a survivor of childhood trauma, and I think this type of story that I might read, that I would see my experience reflected in, a story that I might need to feel like I am seeing my lived experience matters, might not be the story someone else's child needs, but we don't get to tell another family the type of story that their child needs. I will always believe that. And so I think protecting information, protecting knowledge, please, let's protect schools, let's protect libraries. Let's make sure that information is available, because when it's not available, and when you're talking about like political actors and access to grind and what's available and what's not available, I think we all should be questioning, what's the agenda if the goal is for us not to access information? And, that's not conspiracy theorist in any way. It's just that's not the way that we are better. We're not better with less information. We're better with more.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because I grew up very, very poor, and school saved me. If I could not go to school, if I did not have teachers who cared about me, I would have never went to college. I would have never be an educator, but I literally went to school, and that saved me. And it makes me wonder, this is just my thought, is if that's the goal. If I can keep kids who are in abject poverty, if I can keep them in poverty, I now have a class of people who can work for billionaires or who aren't going to think. And for me, it makes me think about, my teachers, they didn't care where I came from. They were like, we're going to learn, this is what you're going to do. And I wonder if the goal is to get rid of public education, because public education, they know, changes the world. And that's just my conspiracy theory. And I don't even think it's a conspiracy theory at this point, but that is my theory on a lot of the legislation that we're seeing, that there is a class of people who do not want public education to be a thing anymore.
Yeah, you actually, when you said public education changes the world, I sort of just got goosebumps. That should be a T-shirt. Public education does change the world. And I was thinking too, school saved me too. I mean, the poverty I experienced was situational. It wasn't generational necessarily, but my mom had my older brother at a time. She was pregnant as a teenager, and her story is her own, and I won't delve into that much, but except to say, because I'm honoring her story, she was educated at a time when it wasn't even allowed, even though there had been Title IX and some other things, the protections didn't extend into all areas of everywhere. And so, she wasn't even allowed at the time to be in school as a pregnant teen, because the idea was that somehow, that sent its own message or something. If she hadn't have had an uncle on the school board who fought for her right to access that education, it would have all been sort of treated like correspondence and those sorts of things. And so I think, that just put us in a position where, I had young parents and we were living in poverty, that there was just a lot to sort of dig out from. But I was thinking, when you were just sharing, Francesca, which thank you for sharing your story. And I always love hearing people's stories and how they became who they are. If there had not been, and maybe you've experienced this a little bit too, and I'm not saying this was anyone's fault, but if there hadn't been a specialness somehow about me academically, the conversation about education in terms of higher education, because I graduated in the 90s, and it's just like the majority of people were not going to pursue higher education, in my state at that time. But if I hadn't have been special in some way, that conversation wouldn't have found me. And I think how terrible, education does change the world. Public education does it. Higher education is a door opener. Let's make the most possible pathways to that as possible. Because if you do want to change the world, you teach it to read. I really believe that.
Yep. And I've been saying this, and this is, maybe we'll go over this next Sunday, is there is when I look at all of the news stories, and y'all excuse my doggy.
Mine will be in any minute. So.
Yeah, like there's a squirrel in the yard. It's an emergency. But when you're talking about those things, I wonder I don't wonder. I know that it's connected, and I think the overall goal is, if we can weaken public education, we can weaken people who are educated, and they will not question what we're doing. And I know some people will say, well, yes, are they targeting minorities? Absolutely. But they're also targeting poor people. Poor people, and it doesn't matter. The poor people, that it does not matter. They want to make sure that those people don't have access, so that they can, do things, and people just think it's a one-off. It's not a one-off. Everything is connected. And I tell people that everything is connected.
I believe that, Francesca, and I think, because we know better, it's our responsibility to do better. And so, I think standing as partners, as educators, and just protecting that line of information is something we all can do from where we are right now, and we have a responsibility to do it.
Absolutely. Now we're going to go to Tennessee, and this story creeped me out so bad. Guys, we are in Washington County, Tennessee. Now, this is kind of like, it's rural Tennessee, eastern, outside of Nashville, but it's on that side of Tennessee. And I'm going to read to you. So a couple of weeks ago, early April, a school board member has a student of the school district sitting beside him. She is there to be at the meeting. And he tells her verbatim, I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I get his words exactly right. But he basically tells her that you are so hot. You are so hot. And it's all on, they get it all on tape, and nobody really says anything. And the board chair, she doesn't stop him. She kind of just quickly goes to the next motion, right? The school board member's name is Keith Irvin. Okay. And he does that. Now, it explodes all over the internet. People are talking about it. And the girl's father, probably about a week or so later, he responds, and this is what the father says: we have remained largely silent while focusing on supporting our daughter and carefully considering the appropriate path forward after the disturbing and inappropriate actions of Keith Irvin. and the complete failure of the Washington County School Board to uphold a safe and professional environment for students. Let us be absolutely clear. We do not condone Keith Urban's behavior in any way. His actions, lewd gestures, a grossly inappropriate comment, and unwanted physical contact with a student, yes, he did touch her, are unacceptable under any circumstances. Intent does not excuse impact. His refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing only deepens our concern. We do not believe he should be anywhere near students. Equally disturbing is the response or lack of response from the school board. Multiple members witnessed his behavior, laughed, and allowed it to pass without immediate accountability. That is not leadership, that is systematic failure. As for the rest of the board, their actions spoke loudly. Not only as parents, but as members of the community, we have lost confidence in their ability to protect the children they are entrusted to serve. This situation is not acceptable. It never was. Our silence should not be mistaken for acceptance. A couple of weeks go by. The news covers it. We find out that this is not Urban's first time being censored. And he's been censored before because he went to a school and said something off topic to a kid. But this week, a couple of days ago, the young lady that he sexually assaulted makes a comment. She comes to the school board meeting and she says directly to him, I do not forgive you, and I do not accept your fake apologies used to protect yourselves. I do not believe that you deserve the peace of mind. So every time you feel a little bit of discomfort from the public, I want you to remember that isn't even a fraction of the discomfort I felt. So we are here. What are your thoughts on this? Because it's more than wild. This was a criminal complaint. I don't know why the sheriff didn't arrest him. And Keith Irving is right here, guys. If you can see, he's in the plaid top right there. That's him right there. So, no, I'm sorry. He's right beside him right there with his hand on his right there. So what do you think about this?
Well, first of all, my first exposure to this story, Francesca, was because you had taken to a little quick clip on Instagram or something, and when I queued it up, you mentioned Washington County, and I'm from a Washington County, and so my blood ran cold. Like, don't let this be about my community. And so I heard what you said about it. I took to the internet to start reading, and on the one hand, so a couple of things. The way that they've tried to spin it on his side, right? And the various connotations of the word hot or whatever. And I grew up in athletics. I was a state champion athlete. And so I played basketball, and okay, I was thinking about, well, we definitely talked about a hot hand. And if someone was hot, then you fed them the ball. And that meant they were on fire. That meant whatever. I thought maybe in some universe, you could say that was what he meant. And then I watched the video. And, I'm confident that's not necessarily what I saw there. But, there are so many things to unpack about this story, Francesca. On the one hand, you said it, intent and impact are not the same thing. We don't look to the person, that did the harming to define the harming. We look to the person harmed, right? We talk about the impacts to that person. What would you have said that is this sexual assault according to your start of the year trainings? Remember these kinds of things. And I saw that same uncomfortability that you were talking about, Francesca, where people were laughing and then deflecting and all of those sorts of things. We have upstander training for learners to prepare them for the moment when you have to live out your values, that you have to say, that is not okay here. That's not the way we do things. And I think, you talked about censure. There have to be ways that we set about that immediately when there's harm done. Instead, there was sort of a doubling down that happened in all of the various things. I actually hadn't seen the dad's response. I was grateful that you read that. I had heard the student's response. I just think, how difficult must it have been to be in this place? How much scrutiny, all of these things. And, your heart has to be for the learner. So how do we make sure that never happens again? What message are we sending about bodily autonomy? What are we sending about safety? Even if that safety were just emotional safety and not also physical safety, which I think we did see in the clip when he actually, touched her body. I think we also have to think about, we're sending messages all the time about what are the adults tolerating. And there should have been immediate intolerance for that. And so you're right, Francesca, we're on the same page for this. I didn't see an innocent remark taken out of context. I saw something said that shouldn't have been. I saw, laying hands on a student. I saw doubling down later when what we should have been talking about is how do we repair this harm, because there was harm.
Oh, for sure. And the girl was like the news, they took out her face, but you can see her body language. She
Sure.
was uncomfortable.
Holding in
And
on
what
herself. Yeah.
yeah, she was like, I could feel for her, and that she was like, I want to disappear. I could see that in her body language. And for the adults, I was shocked that no one on that board said, you are out of line.
No.
Stop immediately.
Immediately.
No one said anything. Nobody stopped him. And, even just watching it, it made me think, we, as educators, we always go through training. We always taught you do this. Had a high school student did this to a high school girl,
Mhm.
that child would have been suspended. It would have been a Title IX. So how in the heck did adults not stop him? And then for him to be so cavalier as, oh, you misinterpreted. No, she didn't. She didn't misinterpret it. She interpreted very well what he did and what he meant. And it made me think, if he was comfortable doing that with an audience, knowing it was filmed, what else has he done that he's comfortable in doing?
Mm. Yeah, the whole story has been one that I've been following closely. I have a daughter who's, just finished her freshman year of college, and I often think, what would I have done if it had been her? What would I want done if it had been her? And I think that, I read something the other day that talked about, they're all our children and we need to treat them that way. I mean, we all have to be outraged about stories like this. We all have to say, not on our time, not in our space, not to our children. But I agree. I watched the video and I watched her kind of fold in on herself. You could see the uncomfortability. There should have been an immediate censure in the moment. There should have been a protocol in place. And I think you even said it earlier, Francesca, when you were talking about just the people with the power to make decisions who don't understand the systems deeply that they're making decisions for. I can't imagine that the educators in that district would not have known what to do if they were faced with that happening in front of them. So how did this board not understand what to do? And I think, again, the focus has to be on repair to this learner. And I really, you know, people's sympathies can flow where they flow. Sympathy primarily has to flow to this learner, and repair to this learner, and protection to this learner. And she suffered harm, and we all watched it. We're all witness to it. And so what will we do now that we have borne witness to it? We have to use our voice to speak up.
And what also bothered me the most about this was, had a teacher done this,
Right.
people would have been calling for their head. But because there was a school board member, and it goes back to what we've been saying, is that people making legislation or people making decisions, are they equipped for the role? And this board obviously is not. I know, people were like, he needs to be off the board. He's elected, so there needs to be a recall. If I don't know about the laws in Tennessee, I'm
Sure.
pretty sure you can do a recall. So while his other fellow board members can't, they can't take him off the board, they could have stopped him in the moment. They could have said, absolutely not, let's break. This is absolutely uncomfortable. But what I was most proud about after this happened, the whole town has rallied again, around this young lady. And they have been coming to these school board meetings, and they have been showing out. And, he's not apologetic. So I'm hopeful that the young girl's dad actually runs against him. I hope he runs against him. I hope they replace everybody on that board. Just like the foolishness that we've seen.
Yeah, there needs to be some training happen. And I mean, youth protection is our collective responsibility. So I'm not surprised to hear that they've so rallied around her. My heart goes out to her.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've talked about this. We've talked about, the responsibility of districts, but I want to go up to Philadelphia. And I want to go up to Philadelphia because this has been
I know where you're going, Francesca.
this is the sentence that has broken the internet. And just for clarity, I used to be a high school English teacher. So I want us to let's read the sentence. And I read it and I said, so before I go into the story, the sentence is, she wore a silhouette of clothes that were extraordinary but somewhat gouged. Now, if I'm reading this, I say, oh, silhouette, okay, outline, clothes, extraordinary, okay, somewhat gouged. I might say either that's very ugly or maybe different. I'm going to use some context clues.
Right.
Did you read this sentence and say, I don't know what gouge meant? Did you read this and say,
Yeah, no, I definitely knew what it meant, but I was thinking about, I was a high school English teacher too, Francesca. Maybe this is why I love watching you so much. But I was just thinking context does matter, and it might be true that only 15% of the time can you actually use context to define a word. But
Yes.
you had made such a great point the other day because you shared a little clip about this story too. We're not asking learners to read for long form anymore. Without any context, how possibly, even if you understood what a silhouette was, even if
Yeah.
you understood the ways in which something could be extraordinary, you don't know the specific way this was extraordinary. You don't know, is this someone who's backlit and they do truly look like a silhouette? Is it the line of the way the clothes are draping? What is happening here? It would be almost impossible to draw any kind of conclusion, even if you were able to sort of decode and then point to, good luck to some of those learners pronouncing gauche correctly or whatever. But, I think that there's so much to unpack in this story too, Francesca, because, my life as a whole child educator, I think about shame a lot. I think about what
Mm,
is it that divides us and what is it that keeps us out of opportunity. And, certainly you shared education unlocked, the door to all things for you, and it did for me too. But, I live in a region that is, it's poor. I mean, we still are poor here, and it is a heritage industries economy. It's an extraction economy in many ways. I'm thinking about like folks who go to the dentist, for example, who couldn't afford to go to the dentist for a while and how shamed they are when they finally go and try to make, some headway in their health. I think about what it means, the type of courage it takes to admit that you don't know something, you don't understand something. And by the way, what type of metacognition it takes to even know that there was a breakdown in your understanding. And so I think there are a couple of things here. One, a learner being sort of a whistleblower, we have to have ways in which that can happen and we pay attention to what the whistle was blown on. So there's that. Without that student becoming then part of the problem, because we don't want to shame and blame learners. But we are speaking to exactly what you talked about in that long form reading experience where we're robbing them of their deeply literate lives. We are not coming together as a community around story anymore. And what's the number one way that we propagate the values of community? I would say it's story. It's our collective story. It's also our individual stories. We're saying that only that short burst information even matters for a time anymore. And so consequently, we become more and more siloed, more separated. There's more of a chasm between us, all of those kinds of things. But I think most students anywhere without context would have a really hard time with that. I think it says less about public education than just the place we're in the world. And I've heard you say so many things that I fully agree with too, Francesca, just the way we started viewing learners and communities once we moved to a high stakes standardized focus in education, instead of thinking about what learners really know and can do and what they need to know and be able to do in order to be successful. There's such a disconnect between those things. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure it's a polarizing hot topic. It would be interesting if I were in my high school English classroom today to see if they could grapple with that or not.
yes, and I said this, I covered this story, and for those who don't know, this happened in a Philadelphia charter school, and this young man, he took a note card and he put two sentences, one on each note card, and he asked his peers, could they read these simple sentences? Most of the kids struggled. Those who didn't understand what it meant, and there was this backlash of the kids are not literate. Now, as a high school English teacher, I have long said that we have abandoned literacy for our children when we stop making them read entire books.
Absolutely.
So people who are listening to this, I want you to know that, and I am not a people say, oh, are you against Common Core? I'm not against Common Core, not for ELA at all. I actually like the standards. But there was a point when Common Core was introduced where it was now okay for kids not to read entire books.
Mm-hmm.
It was okay. And I understood that they wanted students to get, a variety of texts. But what it has done in American schools is that you can get a kid all through senior year and they have not read one full book.
It's so
They
scary.
have read excerpts. So if a kid cannot read a sentence, they cannot read a book. If a kid cannot read a book and they cannot read a sentence, they cannot write a sentence. So for me, this story is much bigger than, because the student knew that kids would struggle with this. I felt like this was he wanted some TikTok clout.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
He got it.
But it spoke to me is that why are adults surprised when this has been set up since the onset? And we know that whole school systems have done away with librarians.
Right.
We've banned books.
So
We,
frightening.
so why are we surprised? Why are we now shocked that kids can't read a sentence? And I don't think it was well written, but why are we surprised?
I agree with you, Francesca. And I think, you're a literacy person like I am. And so much of what you're saying is really resonating with me. But, context does matter. And I agree with you. So we decided we needed to have more of a shift to focusing on information text. And, there was even in the high school English classroom, I had sort of a 60-40 split to information text over fiction for the first time ever when I was a young teacher. And there is value in it. But I'm thinking, you understand as well as I do that high stakes standardized tests further privilege the privileged. There's a reason you can't perform well on those tests if you're reading. By the way, they're fairly long form texts in those tests. If you can't unpack what that text is about because your lived experience can't map onto that, how can you then perform well on that test? That's why building text sets became such an important way that we prepared learners for those tests. Because, for example, if I were reading, fairly long form about yachting as a third grader on these tests, and I had no frame of reference for what it meant to be on a yacht, what the experience might be, if I were to try to unpack that. But if I had maybe a story that reflected my lived experience better, maybe if it were about, baseball or something, and incorporated that same vocabulary, but in a way that I had a frame of reference and could unpack it, I immediately would do better. And so I agree with you. I think that there was a sort of a TikTok clout sort of, this will be really incendiary in some way. And it definitely has been. I don't think it says as much about how fallen the education system is as much as it does about the way that we have so removed human natural rhythm from schooling that we're not able to sit with something long enough to really cultivate a learner who thinks deeply, who interacts often with peers, who builds collaborative knowledge, as we know is so important. I mean, the way we're supposed to be constructing it is together. That's why constructivism matters. We're moving so quickly that we're not valuing community in that moment. And I think that's my saddest lament about the lack of the long form almost, Francesca, is that when we read long form and we do it together, we're having an entire communal experience. And that experience is one that we carry with us forever. And so I don't want my reading to come at me as quick and short burst as my social media does. I want to sit with something. I want to grapple with it. I want to teach my learners how to unpack it. And we're saying that's not good enough. Move quicker, move in these ways. And if you're not doing that, then you're not focusing on education in ways that matter. And I think we're proving we're falling farther and farther short of the goal.
Yeah. And it goes back to, so I always, people have, leaders will come to me sometimes and say, our scores are not good. And I'm always like, what does your library look like? Do you make kids go to the library? Do kids have to check out books? Do you create an atmosphere where reading is cool? If you don't, then we can't complain about what we get. And even when I saw this sentence, I have 4 children, 3 in the house, and I was like, come here, you guys read this. And they read it. It was fine, but they were like, Mom, what is this last word?
Right.
What is this?
Right.
Yeah, right. And so you're right. It speaks to, people are doing things for social media fame, but also, the pundits who are saying kids can't read, they can't do this. Some of that may have some truth, but as adults, we are not requiring them to have the same muscle memory of reading and reading things. I remember as a high school English teacher, I would assign books and students had to read a complete novel every 6 weeks.
Yes. Yeah.
That's it. And I taught in Memphis City schools, and we're going to get to Memphis in a minute, but the kids were expected to read. There was an expectation that you will read outside of class. You will come to class and discuss it. And this was in a community that was poverty stricken. But the kids understood this. And so I always go back to what are we expecting kids to do and what are the systems that we are creating for them? Yeah.
I think the thing that almost bothers me most about this story is just the the gotcha element of it all, right? It's like when we're teaching students that they can't fail forward, that they can't admit what they don't know, and there's shame for what they don't know. I mean, we all will be caught up with eventually for what we don't know. So, you know, I don't like these types of headlines that also, you know, folks will seize onto and think are somehow, you know, symptomatic of the broader system. It's like, this is a snapshot of what's happening in the system, but I wish there were more counterbalancing stories about the brilliant things happening in the system as well. And it's so unfair that the coverage is so imbalanced in that regard, because I agree, you know, again, the way you transform community is by transforming one student at a time. And I will always believe public school is the way we make that happen. I'm sad because there are also so many voices competing about what we should be doing during those hours trusted to us in education. And the truth is, we do have the lion's share of the waking hours of children. I don't know how we got to the place where teachers are treated like they can't be trusted with the honor of that. Most of us view teaching as our absolute calling. You know, I don't know a teacher who goes to school and says they don't want to be right by students. So if the system's broken, let's think about the things we've changed about the system so dramatically in the generation or two since we felt like we were in a place of greater success, because by all metrics, we are supposedly falling farther and farther behind.
Absolutely. And I leave on this point in that we're seeing all throughout, you know, colleges where, you know, things are being banned. You can't talk about this. You can't do this. You can't do that. Our kids need to know what the world is going to be like around them, and they need to be able to have words for that. So they will only get words. You can't see back here, but these are all books. You get words by reading. And that is the one thing you have to, I always liken it to like an input. You're able to output when you've input things into your brain. So, you know, this was a great headline. People clicked on it and all the things, but I really worried about the students I just worry about the kids, because what are we doing? What are we doing if we're not doing this? And it just makes me so upset for them, because why are they even like, yeah, I'm just upset about it.
Well, go ahead. I was just going to say, I've heard you speak too about just the, you know, Common Core and drivers behind it. And I'm a full believer that we want to push towards standards as well. If you're never going to arrive at your destination if you don't have a roadmap, right? So having standards that we're teaching toward is not a bad thing. But absolutely. I also would challenge anyone, open up those standards for your primary grades and think about, were you doing those things when you were a student? I mean, they're easily so many of those things I wasn't doing until 2 years later from whatever grade in that span I was part of. And so these are the types of things that we have to unpack. You know, I think we need to have a conversation that is more communal, that is representative of more voices of just where do we want to go and how do we get there? And who is someone telling us we need to get someplace, or do we want to naturally drive toward that? I just think more conversation is the remedy to almost all of this. And communities, families, teachers, again, they have to just do that in concert with each other.
And this is true. And so we had one more topic, but I think this is a great point for us to stop at, because you hit a point in that a lot of these standards are being driven by testing. And we are telling kindergartners things they should be doing that really it's not age appropriate.
Yeah.
And we're getting them ready for tests that in the grand scheme of things do not matter. I saw this quote one time. It was an author that said, you know, I failed whatever test they took as standardized test as a kid, and now I'm an author. And it made me think, like, you know what? That's exactly right. Like, these tests, it is so much bigger than what we would realize. And as we're talking about this, and we're talking about books, and we're talking about next steps, we have to remember that, so that we don't get caught up in the issue. Is, yes, it can be about students needing to read more in those systems, but the other side of that is a testing piece. People profit off our kids not reading on level. Oh, goodness.
No, I think we just need a retreat where we can unpack all these things together, Francesca, because I so agree with all of it. It's so true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We thank you. This has been an excellent conversation. I promise to keep it under 60 minutes, but as you can see, I can go for 2 hours talking about all things education.
Yeah.
Tell everybody where they can find you. You've written for the Educators Room. Like, tell everybody where can they find you. Guys, we will send this out. This recording will go live on tomorrow, Monday, May 11th. However, where can they find you? What are some of the things that you're doing currently?
Yeah, so I do have my author page, obviously, at the Educators Room. Love writing for the Educators Room. I also write for the Word the Educator regularly around social emotional learning. I do write social emotional fiction for middle schoolers, and you can find me at Lee Reagan Alley on Instagram. I think the nice thing is most of my hats that I wear kind of come together around, what's good for a whole child and what's good for a whole educator, and how do we make communities stronger? And the way we do that is by everyone coming together, I think, in service to making everyone stronger. And the way we're stronger is together. So
Yeah,
I'm so
absolutely.
grateful to have been part of the conversation with you tonight, Francesca. It's been such a gift for me to have this time with you. And again, I start my day with you, and I always click the like, but it's a gift to start the day with you too, because you can feel like it's a type of madness almost that we're living in today, that we just can't have conversations that feel, civil, that uplift, that unite, any event. And starting my day with you centers and grounds, man. I'm grateful. I've been grateful to you so many times in the last few months.
Listen, you are invited to any Sunday. If you want to come on another show,
I'd love
guys,
to.
we continue this every Sunday. We're going to be talking about headline news. I am going to hop off. Thank you, God. Thank you, thank you, thank you for everybody joining us. And we will send the links out to everybody. Happy Sunday and happy Mother's Day.
Happy
Happy
Mother's Day,
Mother's
Francesca.
Day.
Happy
Happy Mother's
Mother's Day.
Day. Thank you for all you do. My kids took me out to dinner today, and my husband, and hopefully you did something for yourself, and your son did something for you, and your daughter and your family. Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day, Francesca. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Absolutely. Have a good one, guys.